All right, this is the Pro Wrestling Illustrated podcast. I'm your host, PWI senior writer Al Castle, joined by my co-host Brian Solomon. How are you, Brian? Happy holidays.
Thank you. Same to you, Al. Happy to be here as always.
And joining us this week, back again, longtime PWI contributor Mike Bessler. If you see action figures and stuff in PWI, that is more than likely the work of Mike.
That's true. I think I posted something to the PWI Facebook account a while back and didn't credit myself. And I think, Al, you had immediately posted this reeks of Mike Bessler or something like that.
Yeah, I think we were just talking about a little before we recorded. And I think it was a Chuck Norris action figure, and I don't know what else, but very.
I think it was the Batista mortgage advisor comic.
Yes, that is right up your alley. But happy to have Mike on. We are recording this over Thanksgiving weekend. Survivor Series was last night. I think it might take a little longer than that to get it up. So we'll try to keep it a little evergreen while also talking current events. But in as much as we're kind of all in the holiday spirit, I got my Survivor Series 1993 t-shirt. Love this. I actually got to meet the guy who, I wonder if you knew him, Brian. I wonder if he was there when you were there. Who was like
the artist?
Yeah, and who painted this?
Yeah, he was still freelancing when I was there. I forget. I should remember his name because I had him as a guest on my podcast. But that's probably the most well-known thing he ever did for WWF fans. But he was a freelancer. He used to be part-time. He was kind of just sort of phasing out when I got there, but I did know him a little bit.
Yeah, I chatted him up a little bit, and I got a son who's a super talented artist, and we're kind of starting to talk about like career opportunities. And I think about that guy because I think he just like answered an ad like in the Times or something. Yeah.
Yes. And he also has done a lot of comic book work too.
Super talented. Yeah,
very great guy.
A lot of like really iconic t-shirts and stuff. But this is the one that I love. I have the VHS tape and I put it up on display every Thanksgiving.
He said he talked about this, how they did a heels version too of that.
I remember that. I remember
with Yokozuna and everything. But something went wrong with it because if you remember, that year was the year at the last minute they changed out one of the members. I think they added Tatanka or something.
They swapped out one of the Quebecers for Crush.
Right. So it screwed up the whole poster. And by the time he redid it, it was very, it just was kind of a mess. So the heel
babyface side too, because it was, I think we got what's his name? Tatanka on this, and he was swapped out with the Undertaker.
Right. I remember him telling me about that. It was just a big giant mess with those posters, having to redo them and everything.
Yeah. So one of the reasons I want to have both you guys on, this is kind of like the old timers club here.
Awesome. This is just what I want to hear 2 weeks before my 50th birthday. Right. Thank you, Al.
But like in as much as I don't know about you guys, but it is right around Thanksgiving that I for whatever reason get like particularly nostalgic for wrestling. And I think it is like the history, wrestling's like long history of these big shows around the holidays, Thanksgiving, Survivor Series, obviously, but not limited to Survivor Series. So I thought we'd have a little bit of kind of a fun chat about that. And also talk some current events, news coming out of Survivor Series. I think stuff that maybe is even relevant to WrestleMania. We had an AEW pay-per-view a week ago, also with some news coming out of it. So we will talk about all that. Right now, let me tell you about the latest issue of Pro Wrestling Illustrated. If I can find it, here it is. It is the Women's 250. I'm thinking the tag team issue is coming out any day now. Kind of the trilogy of ranking issues. A lot of work and a lot of fun. We've got Toni Storm on the cover of Pro Wrestling Illustrated. And I got a stack here. I grabbed everything that I've gotten the last few months. You get the 500. You could get so much more. And as I said, we are now getting into the holiday season. People are starting to think about shopping for the wrestling fan in your life. I don't know about you, but before I was working for the magazine, this would have been a fantastic gift, a subscription to Pro Wrestling Illustrated. I think it's the kind of thing that, and again, speaking personally from experience, when you're a wrestling fan, maybe you're reluctant to kind of like splurge and get it for yourself. But I think I did get it as a gift once, maybe from my then girlfriend, now wife, and awesome gift, right? I mean, just like knowing that you're going to get your favorite wrestling magazine in the mail each month. And now we've got bundle packages where You could have the digital edition as well that comes out sooner. So you could, dig into the issue right away and then have the actual paper copy in your mailbox a little after that. It's the time to do it now. And, you'll get the awards issue, which I think we're starting to work on or should be soon. I'm sure I've got to talk to Harry about the top 10 stories of the year. And as I said, we've got all the other big 10 polls, PWI 500, Women's 250, Tag Team 100 coming out soon. I think it's going to be very newsworthy and a little bit of a, not spoiler, but teaser, maybe even some related to some recent current events on recent pay-per-views that I think will be very significant in terms of who is at or near the top of that list. Don't miss any of it. Go over to pwi-online.com. Other great gifts, merch, t-shirts, all kinds of stuff. So again, for the wrestling fan in your life, if you've got somebody like us, kind of old nostalgics, Pro Wrestling Illustrated surely has been, a big part of their lives for a long time. We are now on I lose track. What are we, 40? We're closing in on 50 years now, I think, because I remember
45. That's the big push this year. Yeah, 45th.
Yeah.
Crazy. I think that the Tony Storm issue has the Chuck Norris Karate Commando photograph in it, if I'm not mistaken. And it's the nostalgia. You're talking about nostalgia. It's for a nostalgia rewind.
Let me find it. Yeah, it's sort of you do. What is the name? Is it Before the Bell? Is your work, Mike?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Here we go. Yeah. We've got.
Look at
that. So this is throwback to Survivor Series 1994, right?
Yeah. Kevin and I were talking about, the artwork for that, and he wanted to do something more than just like a basic photo. And he said, well, we kind of went back and forth. He said, how about something with action figures? So I said, well, I got an Undertaker and I've got a Yokozuna. And he said, well, it's too bad you don't have a Walker Texas Ranger figure. And I said, I do have a Chuck Norris Karate Commandos figure. And he said, you know what to do. So that's what I put together. Because, Chuck Norris was big in the Walker Texas Ranger gig at that point and was the guest enforcer for the Undertaker Yokozuna match.
That another topic that if we've got time, I wanted to discuss, which is sort of like celebrities in pro wrestling, because I think it's really changing, and we saw it with the use of the Costco guys on.
Yeah, I'm ready for that discussion.
yeah, we'll get into that a little later. But I think it's I've heard some people kind of poo-poo it, and I might have also, but I just think. This isn't really a wrestling discussion, but I just think what it means to be a celebrity in 2024 is very different than ever before. But on the topic of the holidays and tradition, again, I get very nostalgic around Thanksgiving. We host it, so my job is day before. I always take the day off of work, clean the house very thoroughly, and I got old Survivor Series on. Working my way up 87, 8. I'll at some point you start getting nostalgic. For me, it's around 95, 96, sort of like pre-Attitude Era is to me where it's like meh. But those early Survivor Series, and they touched on it on the pre-show yesterday, that it's sort of crazy to think that like you'd have one of your biggest shows, because it wasn't Survivor Series, wasn't on Thanksgiving weekend, it was on Thanksgiving, right. And which like would be unthinkable, I think, now. But not only was Survivor Series on Thanksgiving, Starrcade originally was on Thanksgiving, right? I'll go to you, Brian. What was it about Thanksgiving? On one hand, it seemed so kind of illogical that you'd hold one. I remember talking with you about WWE's announcement about doing WrestleMania over Easter next year, and for you that was a deal breaker. You won't be watching it. You'd think that would be similar for something like Survivor Series, and yet this was. And not only were a lot of these promoters counting on people watching the show, they were counting, especially regionally, on people leaving their houses and going to the show, right?
Right, and which is why when you said it's unthinkable, I don't think it's unthinkable at all, because now you're talking about WrestleMania on Easter, for crying out loud, which to me would have been unthinkable, because for years they specifically avoided Easter like the plague, even more than Thanksgiving. So, I mean, I don't think anything's unthinkable anymore. Although the interesting thing about the Thanksgiving tradition in wrestling and why it was such a deal breaker with WWF for a while there is that it really was a Southern thing. It was a Southern wrestling thing. It was not a thing in the Northeast traditionally in the territory days. In fact, as I know full well now from all the Gorilla Monsoon research, they would never, the WWF, the WWF, they would never have shows on Thanksgiving ever. They would never have shows on Christmas ever. Almost positively never. And then, but in the South, going back to, I mean, Starrcade started in 1983 and it was on Thanksgiving. And in the Greensboro Coliseum, they had been doing their big annual show on Thanksgiving since the Greensboro Coliseum opened in 1962, every year. So 83 was just the year they went, hey, you know what? Let's give it a name and put it on closed circuit. They had already been doing it for 21 years. They've been doing it in the Norfolk Scope for almost as long. They were doing it. Georgia Championship Wrestling was doing it in the Atlanta Omni, again, going back to the 60s. And if you wanted to dig it up, it probably went back even further than that. I've talked to people who grew up wrestling fans there. I can't understand it. Maybe it's because there weren't a lot of Italian grandmothers down there. I can't imagine telling my family on Thanksgiving, hey, everybody, all right, I'm going to go down to Madison Square Garden.
You're all going to have to leave.
They would have shot me in the face. That would have been the end of it. So I think it was just a cultural thing where that was like what you said, Al. It was the tradition of, we have the big Thanksgiving. You know, a lot of times families eat early on those holidays. We have a big giant meal. And then instead of settling down on the couch and falling asleep, we're going to go down to the arena and we're going to see, wrestling. It was considered part of their family tradition. It just was not a thing that took root up here. So as we know, though, the Survivor Series, when it started in 87, what was it? It was invented to compete with Starrcade. That was a big deal. It was like, we are now going to start running Thanksgiving. And Vince was a troll before trolls existed. In his infinite spite, what did he call it from year one? The Thanksgiving tradition. The Thanksgiving tradition, which was Starrcade, which was the event that he was trying to kill and did kill because he got it moved off of Thanksgiving. But that was not a popular thing. Even when they started, that was always, and I came to know this from when I worked there, but among the wrestlers, among the staff, that was a very unpopular decision to do that on Thanksgiving. And that is why I think by 91, if I remember right, is when they started doing it the night before on a Wednesday night. And then a couple of years after that, they were like, you know what? Let's just do it on a Sunday like all the other pay-per-views. It just didn't really stick because you didn't have that grounded tradition of like, hey, this is part of our holiday. Because like I said before, it wasn't just Thanksgiving, it was Christmas too. Huge Christmas shows. That was a very big deal in the South for generations in wrestling. And it didn't die out in the even WCW years. They would still do big shows until probably around the NWO era. And that's kind of when it started to die out. It was still a big thing for the longest time.
And the resentment, I imagine, is people wanted to be home with their families. And is that why they didn't do it for a long time? I mean,
yes, that is
Senior or Vince Jr. where they're saying, no, let everybody be home with their family.
That's all it came down to. It was just that of we're going to let people spend time with their family. Like I know, again, in the Gorilla book, like he had an edict, and I don't think he was the only one where he just said, I'm not working Christmas. You can have a show on Christmas if you want. I won't be there. And that's the end of it. And so Thanksgiving was sort of like, in the same vein. And when they started doing it, I know I talked to his family and, they were saying how they were on the warpath. They were absolutely furious because they were losing Gorilla and they were losing Joey Morella, so they're having Thanksgiving without either one of them. And that was something they were not used to. They never had to do it before. And that goes for anybody that was working that territory, especially if you were homesteading. It was just a thing you didn't do. When Vince came in, when he took over in 83, you see for the first few years, they start doing, but for Survivor Series even, they start doing Christmas and Thanksgiving house shows, especially in the South. They start to try to take over that tradition. But then it's weird. After a few years, it stops. It's almost like they got so much pushback that they just stopped doing it. Like it just wasn't worth it anymore. I don't know if they do it now, but I know like they have that big day after Christmas thing at the Garden.
Yeah, I go to it.
That's a big deal, but they don't do it. They don't do it on Christmas. It just was a thing that has never been popular in the North in wrestling.
Yeah, they've run the Garden for years now, and I almost always go to it. One year they did the Coliseum instead. it again, sort of illogical or seemingly logical when you were counting on people leaving their house, jumping in the car, and driving to the arena.
Well,
less so, I imagine, when pay-per-view was invented, and all you were really counting on were people watching television.
Right.
And in that respect, maybe that's kind of ideal, right? You already have a bunch of people over your house. Maybe you split the pay-per-view or what have you. But I'd be curious, like, how Survivor Series did early on relative to SummerSlam, WrestleMania, and the few pay-per-views that were.
If you think about it, it doesn't seem like a smart decision. It's one thing if you have a house show tradition where everybody comes out to the show on the holiday, but if you're doing it even as a pay-per-view, and I think this is what they found, there's no way on earth that you're not going to do a better number if you have it on a weekend, on a Saturday or a Sunday, than if you have it in the middle of Thanksgiving. There's just no way you're not going to do a better number moving it off Thanksgiving, because you are always going to have that percentage, even if it's a small percentage of people who are like, who are just like, I'm not doing that on Thanksgiving. I would love to watch it, but we've got too much going on. Like, you know what I mean? It just doesn't seem like it's smart business.
And there's a good likelihood, more so than any other holiday, I would think, that you're not even home, right? So you're visiting the in-laws, or you're traveling somewhere. So
I didn't even get to watch it even on pay-per-view until 91 when they moved it off Thanksgiving. For that reason, they were just like, we're not doing this. You're not doing this. You're not going over your friend's house. You are here. We're having the antipasto. We're having the you are here, and that's it. So I'm sure I wasn't the only one.
Mike, did you grow up watching Survivor Series or any other wrestling on Thanksgiving?
It came a little later. I think my second kind of I got away from wrestling for a little while, like maybe through high school, but then by college it kind of bit me again, and was getting the pay-per-views. Back when you had to go get the filter to screw onto the back of your TV. And what was that? You had to write a check for like over $100 or something like that, and they would hold the check until you brought the filter back, something like that, like 125 or something like that. And a couple things, I think. First of all, that idea, not from the worker standpoint, but from the audience standpoint, thinking back to 1983, the early 1980s, late 1970s, which I know I can do. It's very similar to your comments earlier about what makes a celebrity now. I mean, the kayfabe was still alive at that point. If things were booked correctly, you could draw a really good audience to a much anticipated show. It was very much must see. So I could see, and I can also see the mentality in booking something like that. If some people are going to go to a football game on Thanksgiving, then some people are going to go to wrestling on Thanksgiving.
Right.
So it makes sense to me, and I do think that I seem to remember at least a couple years watching some kind of wrestling pay-per-view on Thanksgiving Day. I'm glad, though, that Brian brought up around the time that WWF changed it, because I did some looking real quick, and one of my favorite Survivor Series moments or events was actually Survivor Series 92. Which was
the first year that they kind of abandoned the elimination format, the tag format altogether.
Which is odd that's kind of one of my favorite things, but it was, of course, when Mr. Perfect joined forces with Randy Savage against Ric Flair and Razor Ramon, and that was main event number 1 for the night, and I was just so looking forward to that match. I would have been 19 at the time, and it really delivered. And that it's odd. That's what I think about when I think about old Survivor Series. I don't think about the elimination ones. That's kind of my second memory. And then I go back to what you were talking about and looking at the real older nostalgic stuff. A lot of that stuff I got as video rentals from the video store, and didn't see those live. I'm also having some major deja vu and a flashback in this, because I think I had to do this the last time we talked, and this is not staged at all. This picture behind me is crooked, and it is driving me crazy. Did that happen the last time I was on here?
I don't know.
It is not on purpose. I mean, I'm like, how can I just turn around and not? I decided.
I don't know. One time it looked like you were in your basement or something. I don't know. It looked like you were in a hostage situation. All the lights were off. I was getting a little worried about you, but this is definitely better. I could deal with a crooked picture. But one thing I wanted to say about that, and this is coming from me, who's the history guy and all this, and who's always clinging to the past. But I think, and I don't know if they have the nerve to do this, but with Vince gone, I think they should. I mean, the Survivor Series is not the Survivor Series anymore. I mean, why are you even calling it that? There is no series.
I think,
but call the show War Games. Change the name. Change the pay-per-view to War Games.
I think there's a happy medium which they've arrived at, which is Survivor Series.
What is the series though? There was a series of tag team elimination matches, right? There's no series anymore.
It's just a brand.
I guess, I know, but it doesn't have meaning anymore.
What did you think of those elimination matches and getting away from them? Again, and a lot of it is just nostalgia. I loved when they kept them right up until, and Survivor Series in particular has been a real kind of struggle with them to kind of figure it out. You remember for a number of years, it became the brand supremacy thing, and they'd have champions from one brand, and that never really.
No, I went to one of those. It was one of the most boring shows I ever had.
I went to one was the one in Brooklyn?
The Brooklyn one.
Yeah, I went to it. It was
boring.
Awful.
Terrible.
Really bad. It was Big E and Roman. Yes. But also Becky and Charlotte, which was good.
It was. That was the best match, yes.
But yeah, and the elimination stuff, I'd always enjoy, but it was real. It became a relic, and in the 80s and into the 90s, there was intrigue in it could be 3-on-1 or 4-on-2 or something like that, and that just went away, and it wasn't interesting anymore. So I think, and I went to the first War Games a couple years ago in Boston, and went to the press conference afterwards, and that was my question to Triple H was, is Survivor Series essentially War Games going forward, and are we done with the elimination matches? And he kind of was non-committal, kind of a we'll see sort of thing, but clearly that's where they're at. You run into kind of the same issue that they did with the elimination matches, and even with some other stuff, like the Elimination Chamber, or when they did Hell in the Cell on a certain month, that it doesn't necessarily feel organic. And I think this was the case with the women's War Games, which was we need 2 teams of 5, and we got to concoct a storyline. Obviously, the Bloodline was made for this. I mean, I think it was one of the most organic War Game situations.
Past 2 years, even last year's was like that too.
And that Boston one, because Bloodline was together, it also really worked.
Yeah,
I really like elimination matches in more of kind of a regular time thing. I like to see them more between factions as opposed to a single night event that has, that is the majority or half of the card, because it does get a little tedious after a while.
Totally boring.
And the selling of it too, by the commentators gets to be a little long-winded as well. But I think good elimination matches in regular time, so to speak, are pretty cool. And sometimes I'd like to see more of those throughout the year as part of a feud.
I think
I was going to say there are 2 things that were a real problem for elimination matches. One was if you were going to do it sort of realistically, then there'd have to be a realistic amount of time in between falls, and then these matches would stretch on forever. And I remember the tag team, 1988, the tag team one, which it got down
45 minutes.
Oh, it was killer. It was just unwatchably boring.
But it was a very good match, though. But it just went very long. I mean, you had some incredible people in there. I know the one you're talking about. I mean, it's just too long. It's too long, though. That's the thing. There's so many guys on the apron that there's
you couldn't see the ring.
They couldn't run the ropes. Remember that? They couldn't even go into the ropes. But I think
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I think a couple of things hurt it, which is hard to explain. One is the lack of stakes, which in the beginning it's a great novelty, right? Where it's it's never been done before the first few years, but without any stakes, I think it started to almost feel like we're just pausing everything and we're doing this show that exists out in some alternate universe somewhere, and then we're coming back to the storylines again. It just felt like there was nothing like that. And another thing, and this may be my bias, maybe it's whatever, guys could tell me if you agree with this, but it felt like they were more engaging in the days when the wrestlers were more distinct characters and were more larger than life and very visually distinctive from each other. Whereas once you started getting into the era where it was a little more wishy-washy and then it wasn't as colorful or flamboyant and the characters weren't quite as clearly cut, and it's just like, here's a team of 5 wrestlers wearing trunks against a team of 5 wrestlers wearing trunks, and half of them have goatees and long hair. And it's not the same as when you have Ultimate Warrior, Legion of Doom, the Texas Tornado.
They did a good job back then of kind of like, they'd have the Hulkamaniacs, which was like Hogan and his buddies. It was Duggan.
It was like a comic book. It was like the Super Friends versus the Legion of Doom.
They'd have the was it the Foreign Fanatics, which was the Bolsheviks and whoever was doing
Rowdy's versus Rude's Brood. I mean, things like that.
I got a kick out of that stuff. I really liked it. Again, I don't know. I think you're absolutely right. Like, and I never thought about that, but it worked better in the real gimmicky era versus like Randy Orton, Kofi Kingston, whoever the hell else, and 3 other guys,
But again, I don't know if you're 10 years old, if that means anything, right? Who knows? But I mean, to people like us, it does.
Yeah. Am I in the minority though? And it wouldn't be the first time I've had an unpopular opinion, but I've never really been a big fan of the War Games format. And I particularly, I was more of a WWF guy than a WCW guy, and didn't have that part of history. Even growing up, you guys have heard me talk about it before, living in like the Memphis territory and having Pafo's ICW. So I didn't have that as part of my history. So even now, I still get to that part where I struggle, and I'm really easy with like flexible reality and suspension of disbelief, but I really struggle with like the 2 different segments of the War Games, and you have everybody fight for a while, and then the bell rings, and then the real match starts. I understand the match beyond the match concept. It's just never really worked for me. I do think, and I know we're going to talk about Survivor Series in a little bit here, I do think it worked for the for the bloodline storyline, but beyond that, I'm just not a big fan.
I think the problem with War Games is that it is very hard to pull off well. But when it's pulled off well, it can be incredible. Like the original 87 one people talk about, the 92 one, which is my sentimental favorite. Even Cody Rhodes said that was the greatest one. It's the best, and it seemed like even after a while, WCW forgot how to do them the right way. The thing is, it has to be organic, like we've said a million times. And that even comes down not just to the feuds going into it, but even the blocking of the match. WWE doesn't seem to know how to do this match. And when it comes off well, it almost seems like it's by accident. To just turn War Games into this garbage match where people are just robotically, almost without emotion or feeling, almost like they work on the janitorial crew, just looking under the ring very calmly, removing whatever items are inevitably there, bringing them into the ring without even any purpose of why, just so they're there in case we need them. Like, it's just very cold, emotionless. You need intense emotions. You need to really feel that people are trying to hurt each other. And I say this all the time, you need blood. You need blood in a War Games match. And I can quibble about so many things. Like, it seems like every little change they make makes it worse. Taking the roof off makes it worse, because then it turns into every other cage match where you can climb in and out. Taking away submission only makes it worse, because then you get the sense of like, we are going to beat you until you give up. Forget about pinning you. You are going to give up. And it doesn't even have to be some crazy spot. Like in the 92 one that everybody loves, it ended because they were just beating the living hell out of Larry Zbyszko, and he just couldn't take it anymore, and he quit. It was a very organic finish. So, I mean, like, it's hard. It almost feels like the Survivor Series matches are easier to pull off from a booking perspective. Like, it's a thing that Pat Patterson can kind of whip up in his glory days of how everyone's going to be eliminated. But War Games, if you don't do it the right way and it doesn't have that kind of intensity, it can be a slog. A lot of these WWE War Games matches are just like, how could a match that's supposed to be this crazy be this dull? And I think sometimes even the wrestlers, it's like they don't know what they're supposed to be doing in there. So it just becomes, we're just going to throw a bunch of crap at each other and garbage cans and things. And that's not really what it ever was intended to be. So that's the problem there, I think.
I've really enjoyed him, and talking a little bit about last night's War Games. I think the last a few years since they've restarted this, and they'll have the women's and the men's, it feels like there's one where the storyline is organic, and that's been the men's one over the years, and the other one is just kind of like a stunt fest, and it's been done to kind of varying degrees. I've seen it work well with the women with like a lot of intensity. I didn't think this year's worked well at all. I thought it was kind of clumsy and boring and kind of too over choreographed. But I think done well, the War Games match, you've got great storytelling in it, and I think they'll very much executed that with CM Punk and him and Roman kind of quibbling inside the cage, and the tension inside
that was
the
great.
match. I thought that was all super well pulled off, and I enjoyed it thoroughly. It is the case that it can drag a little, because nothing is happening until everybody, or you're not going to get a finish until everybody's in the ring. So, when Tonga Loa comes out for the fourth guy, you're like, oh, whatever. But there are interesting spots along the way. I thoroughly enjoyed the men's War Game last night. I've gone back and forth about some of the changes. I missed the roof because it was novel, but I also understand how it could be limiting in the modern style, and that they can't do spots off the top of the cage, which is what WWE wants to do.
I kind of thought it was maybe because of Hell in a Cell too, because that's a roofed cage too. So they didn't want to have two
historically. I
think
cages. That is part of it. Yeah.
But even when you talk about the '92 War Games, one of the most memorable spots is when they were on top of the cage, which was a lot of fun. And that was much more rickety, kind of a cage than they have now. But I think they've made it their own. It works really well. The bloodline, you knew the moment, or at least I knew the moment that Solo started building his own bloodline, that this is what it was all building towards. It was a War Games. I was uneasy about them making it 5-on-5, because then you kind of you're arbitrarily adding guys who aren't really part of the storyline. But what I did anticipate, and I'll ask you both about this, was that they were actually building this kind of closes one chapter and opens the next one, and they used the addition of CM Punk maybe to start off whatever is next for Roman. So why don't I get your thoughts on that, Mike? What did you think of Punk's involvement in War Games, and where do you think it's going? Is this WrestleMania, Roman Reigns and CM Punk?
I don't know, and I want to qualify this by saying it's going to sound like I'm complaining a lot, especially compared to the two of you who seem to really enjoy it. I think one of the things that Brian said earlier about a lot of guys looking alike, dressing alike, similar characters, made it a little not black and white, but kind of more grayish for me. I'm not sure how I feel about CM Punk, and I was just a huge CM Punk fan back in the day, and I think it's one of these, and it happens. I think it happens to everybody. It might happen to guys who write about it, who have to kind of take it in, for different reasons. I think sometimes I know a little bit too much about Punk to enjoy him the way I used to. I'm probably not unique in that. My notes here even say from the match, am I jaded for not buying the tension with Punk and Roman? It's not Hogan Warrior. It's not Perfect Savage. It's not Batista Undertaker. It's not Cena Michaels to me. It just didn't feel comparable to that. It was fun, with WWE. There's always that spot fest at the end. The go to sleep was really bad, but that's me being nitpicky. I thought it was okay. I didn't. I mean, I know that something's going to happen where Reigns is going to, take back his place as the head of the table. I know that that's coming, but I couldn't really see how CM Punk fits into that moving forward, and I'm not sure if I care. And that sounds really crappy, but I'm just being frank and honest with you guys.
It certainly looks like the fans care. I mean, this was hugely over. The ratings have shown it. People popped like crazy when Punk was announced, and I really didn't even. I couldn't have predicted it. I guess maybe I should have, but I think it ended up being the right move in that it got fans that much more excited about it. And now again is building to this. To me, Brian, this feels like, and I know that I would have predicted this before, but this feels like a really big match if and when they do it. What are your thoughts on where they're going, and what is the favor?
Well, last night, that's the thing. Last night was when I really first started thinking that, and I even turned to someone who I was watching it with, and I said, "Oh, so I think this is Roman Reigns versus CM Punk at WrestleMania." But then the interesting thing is when he said that to him, "I'm going to ask you a favor," to Paul Heyman. At first, I thought like, "Oh, well, that's an interesting angle on that. We all know what that favor is going to be." But then I got to thinking like, well, wait a minute, what's the favor? Because Roman's not the champion anymore. So it's not like he's saying my favor is I want a title shot. What's the favor? Why does he have to ask Paul Heyman for permission to wrestle Roman Reigns? Like, that can't be the favor. If it is, it would be a little weird. Maybe there's something else to that. I don't know. But I like it. And I like the idea of tying in the connection that Heyman has with both guys. It is so surreal and bizarre to see Heyman as a babyface. I'm trying to rack my brain. I'm sure he's been a babyface. I guess in ECW, he was sort of a de facto babyface just because he was the guy that was bringing them ECW, but I can't ever remember him being like a true, am I missing something in WCW or I don't know, but like seeing him come out and give that like pep talk to Roman and CM Punk. I mean, it was a great moment, but it was so weird hearing him go like, "We have to win this, guys. You bring out the best in each other."
It's on par with the one night only.
Yeah, I guess so.
Events. Yeah, I mean, it's really
he's not just a one night only though, but this is a long term. Like I even noted when he came out first for the first time ever when he came back to introduce Punk. If you guys noticed, he was dressed more casually. It was like his way of saying like I'm a babyface now. I'm going to wear a turtleneck. I'm not going to be all stuff. I'm not saying I'm going to wear this all the time, but this is my signal to you that I'm more likable now. I'm like one of you guys now. But he's great. He's great in everything he does.
If I could just revisit too, I don't want to sound to anybody who's listening like I'm like trashing this event or anything like that. I thought Jey Uso's entrance was terrific. I think Jacob Fatu is like super fun to watch. It's kind of like Io Sky in the women's match. I mean, those were both kind of the standout entertainers for me. I didn't hate it. I wasn't hate watching it. It wasn't tough. It just wasn't. It just wasn't top tier for me. Like I don't know that I would ever go back and watch this again. That there were moments where like I would want to revisit it, unless. There's some kind of terrific Bloodline retrospective, like the 3 DVD sets, like I know we don't do physical media anymore, but if there was some long form thing, I would be interested in seeing it again. But it just, my heart wasn't in it.
But on that point, Brian, and this has been going on now, what are we, 4 years into the Bloodline, something like that? And we've talked
is when it really got going, yeah.
And we've talked about there have been peaks and valleys, but by and large, I mean, I think this is objectively one of WWE's most successful long-term storylines ever. At some point, it has to come to an end. Does it feel like that was kind of it? I mean, it feels, on one hand, it feels like that was a logical end, but also you've got all these guys, right? I mean, and if you stop the Bloodline. Roman will be fine. Jay will be fine. Both those guys, super over. They could do their own thing apart from everybody else. I think Jacob Fatu has got, like Mike talked about, a huge upside. But if without the bloodline, I don't know what becomes of Tama Tonga and Tonga Loa, even Solo, Jimmy Uso. So it feels like, I don't know. I think it'll be hard for them to ever like fully kind of cut bait with the bloodline.
I don't think it's finished because, I mean, hang on a second. One thing that Michael Cole even sort of made it clear at the end, because he's talking about the stakes of the match and how it's the old and at the end he makes a point to say, but Solo Sikoa is still the tribal chief, and there's no way they're going to leave it like that. So I feel like really the ultimate end stage, at least of this phase of it, has got to be Roman versus Solo for the bloodline kind of thing, with Roman winning and finally getting that thing back. I don't know. I still don't think they have an end game in mind for this. I think it's just that they're interested in finding ways to continue to keep it interesting. I still think that when we look back on it in years to come and we analyze it and everything, that we will feel that the period we're in now is definitely past the peak of it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying it's Wolfpack versus Black and White. I mean, it sort of is, but a better version of that, if I could say. And but I think they're going to just try and keep it going. I think there's going to come a point where it does. I don't know if this is maybe just me talking, where you do get to the point where you're like, all right, so this is just going to be a bunch of Samoan guys fighting each other forever. Like that's what WWE is. It's just Pacific Island warfare, like for eternity, and just more and more and more and more of them. I think eventually that kind of thing will run its course. I just don't think we're there yet. No.
I think it could eventually, sort of like what became with NWO, is you could keep it around, but it becomes more kind of mid-card fare and not necessarily the main event. So, you could have Solo and the Tongans doing their thing, maybe a tag team championship feud or something, but moving down on the card. One thing that also was occurring to me last night, and this is another topic that we've talked about, is seeing Roman so incredibly over last night, seeing CM Punk so incredibly over last night, and then realizing neither of these guys are supposed to be the top guy, right? The top guy's not even on this show. In Cody Rhodes. Is that a problem that it feels like because Roman has become so hot and Punk has been so hot last few months, Cody sort of de facto taking a back seat to both of them?
It would be a problem, I think, if it really seemed to be hurting him. And I don't think it is, because he's still enormously popular. I don't think he's lost a step since he's been champion in terms of like his perception with fans and the support that he has. If it was a situation where it was like, those times when Hogan would still be the top guy, even though he wasn't the champion, and you definitely felt like it was hurting some of those people below him. I don't think, maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I think that's purely opinion. I don't think this is hurting Cody. He still seems to be doing great. I'll say this. Roman is definitely above him in the hierarchy in terms of the most over, baby face in wrestling and the most popular. I don't know if Punk is necessarily. I think Cody
knocking on the door.
I think Cody and Punk are at a comparable level, and Punk might even be a hair below, especially with younger fans who don't, where Punk's history doesn't matter as much to them. But I think Cody's doing fine.
It's a good problem to have, right? I mean, that you've got like this many guys who are that over, and I'll put Jey Uso in that mix too. I mean, I think Jey Uso is near kind of world champion headliner overness, right?
That's how it felt. That's how it felt when it came out.
Yeah, and that wasn't one of the hotter crowds. I actually thought like the crowd didn't get as hot for Jay as some other crowds have with the entrance. But he's hugely over. And remember, we've got a whole other world title too that was on this card, and that very much feels like several tiers below all of this.
That crowd was they were very odd last night. They were quiet at weird points. Mm-hmm. Even with Roman, there were things that he did where they didn't pop, and I can't remember where. I definitely remember most crowds popping for certain things. And even in the world title match, the Gunther, boy, were they weird during that. It almost seemed like they really didn't care about Damian Priest at all. Like
Yeah,
the baby face spots where he's trying to get sympathy and make his comeback, it's just dead silence. And they were very loud pro Gunther chants, which the announcers did not even acknowledge, which to me is always a red flag, because it's like they are very careful about not wanting to turn him, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I felt like that did not bode well for Damian Priest, that match and that appearance, and that's unfortunate too, because he was pretty hot not long ago.
I don't think he was ever as hot as they needed him to be, and I think part of it was not to get into all the conversation, but it's the real kind of like logical holes in the Money in the Bank, especially if you put it on a babyface, is that he fluked into being a world champion. I mean, that's just the reality of it, and then you turn him babyface, and it's like he skipped several steps. Like if Jey Uso won the world title today, I think it would feel like, okay, here's a guy who earned that spot in the card, and now he's so over that you kind of can't deny him. Were it not for the cash-in, Damian Priest was not a main event level talent. And this isn't any slight on the guy, who I think is terrific and super talented. But again, he just sort of skipped several steps and then got to the top and did a fine job, an admirable job. But again, a good problem to have, in that you've got so many other guys who are doing such great, legit generational Hall of Fame. We haven't talked about the Hall of Fame, but Roman is on. Punk didn't get in, did he?
No, he didn't quite make it. He got over 50% of the vote in the modern category, but you need to break 60%. It needs to be like a real decisive, and he didn't quite get that. But I
think Punk's there.
He'll go. No, he's there. He's there. I don't vote for guys that are currently active, but I mean, barring that, I mean, he's a shoo-in. Like, second he retired, I would vote for him in a heartbeat.
And Roman, I think, absolutely deserved to be there too. So,
yes,
so
I think so.
Shifting a little bit, let's talk a little AEW. Don't need to talk about everything going on, but maybe talk a bit about. To me, the most interesting thing about Full Gear was this thing with the Costco guys, right? And what's interesting is that is interesting. and I was having my coffee the week before the show, and in the morning, and saw the thing with QT Marshall doing the rap song, his version of the I Bring the Boom, and I'm like, what is this? And it just seemed like so like embarrassing. Like, what is AEW sunk to? And like that moment, my 15-year-old comes in the ring and he's like, did you hear the Costco guy is gonna wrestle on this show? I came to know from my son, this is a big deal. And sure enough, you saw the numbers that AEW did for the YouTube stream. And I think I saw something where it was the third most watched wrestling social media clip of the year, below, The Undertaker at WrestleMania.
Right.
And I think Joe Hendry at NXT was.
And for AEW, it was the number one. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So for whatever, you want to quibble about, like, and I saw, Wade Keller talk about this, who I respect a ton, and he had a reaction that I think I would have had once upon a time, which is like, this is sort of below them, and why kind of like lower yourselves to this for a very niche audience. And he likened it to like when TNA would bring in like a NASCAR driver or something that had a big following, but the reality is that most of your audience doesn't know who he is. And I don't think that was a great analogy, but I think it speaks
There's
to
a message for you.
Oh, sorry about that.
That's right. I think it speaks to
that's the voice of Hal 9000. That's my mail notification there.
It's what it means to be a celebrity has changed so much, and I think some of it is just generational, and just that people of a certain age, myself included, like I don't know that we're necessarily in tune as to like what is relevant culturally than younger people. A weird way like this manifested, not to get political again, but was in the election, right, where you saw the Harris campaign like getting Beyonce and John Bon Jovi and Julia Roberts and Oprah Winfrey, and Trump. You know, you'd watch the RNC, and they had like no real celebrities. They had like Kid Rock and Hulk Hogan, but Trump was going on Joe Rogan and Aiden Ross and all these other really like popular YouTubers, and it made a difference. So, you know, Mike, I'll just ask you your thoughts on this. What was it a good move to get in bed with the Costco guys, and should wrestling companies more and more be looking to do stuff like this?
It's odd because it feels weird, and I'm embarrassed to say, before I knew who the Costco guys were in this context, my son had already shown me video of them maybe 6 or 7 months ago. Like, and it was kind of like, isn't this funny? Isn't this cringy kind of thing? Like, can you believe this is a thing? You know, the analogies that you gave, I think, are pretty fair, but where I would tweak it a little bit is what we had in between like bona fide celebrities and social media celebrities is having reality stars come into wrestling. And of course, everybody remembers when Snooki was in, you know, WrestleMania. But do you guys remember? And I can't even remember their names. You guys are from closer to the shore than I am. But the Jersey Shore people that came to TNA, JWoww maybe, and
yeah, did they have the situation or
yeah, I had no idea who these people were. Like,
yeah, I think that's a good point. Or like Survivor stars over the years have shown up on wrestling. Yeah.
So
the precursor to the modern social media star.
Yes, I remember running into Joe Millionaire backstage at the Garden once. If anybody remembers,
Joe Millionaire,
and he was as confused about being there as I think everyone else was. Yeah.
But I got to tell you, I think like, and this sounds absurd, the Costco guys are more famous, I think, than any of those people, right? Which is crazy.
Yes,
because they don't do anything.
I mean, that seems to be the case. I don't know, what does this all have to do with Costco? What am I missing?
They did like a TikTok video where they like go to Costco.
They love Costco.
It's this like really cringy
Costco
thing.
Okay.
We're Costco guys. We what does it eat? Like a double chunk
chocolate chip cookie. Yeah. That's
it's impossible to explain.
If you put the reality show in there, though, you get like a third, not quite data point, but you get something to complete that trend line. So it's not just 2 points. And then it becomes like an evolution of you know what being a celebrity means to pro wrestling. And to an extent, wrestling has always borrowed from pop culture. Not to an extent. No, I mean, wrestling has always borrowed from pop culture. Sure. You guys remember when somebody wrestled as Freddy Krueger, literally as Freddy Krueger in the Memphis territory, wearing the mask, the sweater, and all that stuff. So is one of the things, and I wish that you guys would have picked topics of things that I actually like to talk about, because I sound like a cranky old man.
That's all right. I'm going to top you when it's my turn.
I got this group together.
I watched the match, and I'm glad that
guy's got a great punch. That guy has got a great
I thought the exact same thing. When
I
saw him on I don't know if it was Rampage or whatever, and he threw his first punch, I was like, that's a hell of a
That was like a Jerry Lawler punch, unless he's really just potatoing the guy. I don't know.
You talking about when he took out Marshall at the end of the match?
There were a few times.
It was on one of the shows building. I think it was like the weigh-in or something.
No, but even during the match too.
Yeah. Didn't it remind you of the old story, though, the WrestleMania story where, you know, Mr. T's telling Roddy Piper that he's just going to come and like bludgeon him and all this, and Roddy's like, that's not how it works, you know? Why do regular people have?
Yeah, but that guy was a wrestler.
Powers in a wrestling match,
and that's the thing.
You just put a chair or something like that,
right? And maybe that's why he worked well, because this guy was a trained wrestler, you know, and he had some. And I guess the question is like, but then they have the Rizzler, who's just like a little kid, like a cute kid who does a thing with his face.
I don't know what was going on with that. I kept going, what is he like doing to his face? Like, what is that? And then I sort of figured out, because my son is the same age as him, and I'm thinking like, all right, so somebody must have sat this kid down. This poor kid, I'm a poor kid. He's probably could buy and sell me at this point. But somebody must have sat him down and said, listen, anytime a camera's on you, you're going to do this. You're going to touch your cheek. You're going to touch your chin. You're going to, for whatever reason, put your finger in front of your mouth like you're shushing somebody that's not even there or talking. You're going to do that every single time. And that kid, man, is doing it. I just don't understand what the hell it is, because it's so bizarre and strange. Like, he just starts doing all this, and he's like this little. I started wondering, like, is this kid okay? Like, I don't know.
I know. Yeah,
is he really okay?
But I do think it speaks to like the importance, and I think they're doing a fine job of it, I guess, on both sides, and maybe need to do more of it, of finding what is relevant culturally, and WWE's done it with Logan Paul, and when Logan's brought out different cronies, KSI and some other people. We just saw the Mike Tyson, Jake Paul, the ridiculous numbers. Again, it's like it's hard to accept that, we're a generation that still grew up with like movie stars and TV stars and what a big deal it was to get on Johnny Carson. But now the reality is that people get famous for nothing at all. You don't
having any skill or ability.
Yeah.
I didn't know who IShow Speed was when he showed up.
I actually did. So good for my kids. When it came out, I was like, "Oh, that's Speed." Yeah.
Yeah. I did want to say though, people just love trashing Tony Khan, and he is hard to defend sometimes. We've used the word cringy a couple times, so Al knows I hate overusing words, but cringy is the best word to describe some of Tony Khan's behavior. But I saw people on social media trashing him for, I don't know, it was a tweet or something like that, or some post about the Costco guys and the Rizzler, and people saying, well, this obvious, because he was saying, oh, we learned this and that from them. Right, and people were saying, well, that just shows that Tony Khan doesn't know what he's doing. No, not at all. I mean, I think he is trying to learn and hop on trends the same way he's seen not just wrestling, but marketing in general. And to some, I hate saying this, but to some extent, that is commendable. If you're latching on something to get views, to get revenue, to build your audience, that is kind of what it's all about, isn't it?
Yes. But is it working? I guess that's a question for you, Brian. It's been a while since we've talked about this, and since we have talked about kind of the state of AEW, they got a new TV deal, big money. So again, there's always kind of these mixed signals. On one hand, there is data to show you that they're doing really well, and then there's other metrics. Their live attendance is at all-time lows, where they're now moving.
So are their TV ratings. Their TV ratings are at all-time lows.
I mean, some of these TV shows, it almost feels like a worldwide taping, or something like that. In that these crowds are so small, you can't have the arena any darker. And now I think they are taking the next steps, that they're just booking smaller arenas. But you're hearing about them, doing 1,200 people or in that neighborhood for television tapings. So what does that tell you, Brian, about? Is it, and that's what people say. People make too much of that. That's not really the important metrics, and in other places they're doing really
right. Well, they have an unlimited supply of capital. We know that. We've talked about that. This whole conversation just hinges on the fact that for whatever reason, and maybe there was something that Warner Brothers Discovery saw that made them go, we're going to stick with these guys. Against the instincts of a lot of other people. Maybe they know better than we do. They don't seem to be like a company that is healthy and thriving, other than the fact that they keep having money thrown at them. So it is a strange thing. It almost feels like TNA, if TNA was owned by billionaires, in a weird way, because TNA was also very, very good and hot, and they were like in the same ballpark-ish second place company at one point, and then suddenly they're not. So it is a weird thing, because make no mistake about it, their numbers are just bad. And yes, all of TV is bad and all of TV is trending downward, But I mean, we're talking like record lows in terms of audiences recently for shows like Collision and Dynamite. And, you can't fill, I was at a Total Mortgage Arena in Bridgeport for the Dynamite they had there. Now, I know they're like, what's that?
What was that crowd like? How full was it?
There was like 2,000 something people there.
Really?
And the thing about it is,
what, maybe
it seats over 10,000 people, but that's if there's no TV setup at all. But we all know, especially from what WWE's been doing, you can make that TV setup as small as you need it to be if you could put enough people in there. So they essentially had a 10,000 seat arena. They put about 3,500 seats on sale out of that, and they sold under 3,000 of those. And it was weird because, it was empty. It was dark. It almost seemed like the audience was very disengaged and even hostile at points. It almost, which is something that's changed because I've been to a lot of AEW shows. It almost feels like the audience is now pissed off because they want the show to be better than it is. Tony Khan was getting loud boos when he came out, which is something else I never heard happen at any of the shows. I think people are really kind of even the fans are getting fed up with it. So what they're left with now are the people who are like, it's either what they're left with now or either people who are like, I still love it. This is great. I love it no matter what. Or the other people who are like, I really, really want to like this. And I'm going to stick with it because it used to be so good. And I'm going to give them a chance. And boy, but this better change soon. It feels like that's what's left, those two groups.
AEW does have a very dedicated fan base, very vocal fan base. And I'm sure you guys will disagree with this in some way, but in some respects, but the echo chamber of this is bad, WWE is better. And so I think that does erode or change the perceptions of the product a little bit too. I mean, people do get that fatigue of, defending something, especially if it's not meeting their own expectations. So much of this conversation, though, feels like things that were said about TNA some time ago when Dixie Carter was running the show. She faced the same, that same critique of, she had all kinds of money and she was signing this, but didn't really know kind of how to right the ship. I mean, it's so familiar, and Al will remember well that I was, one of TNA's staunchest defenders back in the Dixie Carter years, because there was some really good wrestling coming out of TNA at the time.
I think what it feels like, one thing just out with AEW, especially being there live, it feels to me, which sometimes happens, I think, with wrestling promotions, it's like it's your team. It's your ball team. You're going to go see the Mets even when they suck and they're in last place. You're going to root them on. You want them to do well, but there's also going to be that undercurrent that sometimes happens of these bums, these damn losers. Just get up and start playing better. Like, you're making this torture for me. It's like people act, towards the Jets and all this kinds of things.
Like the Cowboys this year.
Right, or anything, anything you want to name. I've had the experience with the Yankees, but it's like, this is what's happening now with the AEW fan base. Like, we are the AEW fans. That's who we are. But damn it, I wish they would get better.
I think it's a really good point. And that's certainly been me. I mean, I grew up in the Northeast, a WWF fan. And so I've been that with WWF, WWE over the years, going to these shows where the product is bad and the place is almost empty. And you show up and you kind of like, you're pulling your hair out like, this is so awful. And you still pay your good money to see it. But I on that point, how much of it do you think, Brian, is that? How much has the AEW product changed? Is it worse than it was in 2019? Because, I don't know that I could see that much how it was always the priority was really athletic, kind of high octane wrestling content. A wrestling company for Dave Meltzer. Right, when you had on your show. So not to disparage Dave, but a wrestling company whose priority is star ratings. That's kind of like my takeaway, and they've kind of always been that. Or how much has it changed? Am I not seeing the change?
I think there have been times where they were doing some great things. CM Punk and MJF is one of the greatest feuds I've ever seen. or I've seen in definitely in recent years. I mean, it's one of the best things they did, and they've done other things that really felt like it was really working. They're doing things now where, and again, wrestling is such a weird thing because perception becomes the reality. So when the fans start to lose the buy-in and lose the interest, it makes everything feel worse. Like this stuff with Adam Cole is just it's like torture. Kyle O'Reilly comes out. It's like they're having an argument between like college dorm buddies over something that nobody really cares about. Like, you're friends with him, but he's not really your friend. I'm your friend. And we've been having this conversation with different characters for the last 6 years. Oh, is he really your friend? No, I'm your friend. That guy's not your friend anymore. Look at what he did to you. I'm your friend. And round we go. No one cares. And some of these things are playing to crickets. And it didn't feel that way. I was at the first Grand Slam. That was like being at a WrestleMania.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not exaggerating. It was like a WrestleMania. When Daniel Bryan came out, my God, I took a video of it, and the thing went viral.
Too, amazing. And I was at the most recent one, and not quite empty, but I think something you said that's really true is that it almost becomes this self-fulfilling thing that when you walk into the arena and it's largely empty, it feels like you're at kind of like this losing wrestling product, and it just sort of permeates. And what gets them out of that? Because WWE's been through that. Every wrestling company has been through that, and something kind of shakes loose. Is it a star breaking through? Because and if it is, I don't see it on the horizon. I mean, I guess you could have said that had been Swerve, but they went off track. And Swerve, I don't know that ever really. I think the wrestling fans really liked him, but I don't think he was ever really on the cusp of really breaking through to being that top star. Is it Will Ospreay?
I think it's the lack of ability to. Will Ospreay, I think, is one of the shining lights of.
No, I mean, is he the guy that could pull them out of this?
Potentially, I think, because the problem is they just seem to. The biggest flaw is their trouble in following up on things, and so part of what happens is, which is why I think the new star thing is never going to work, because what keeps happening over and over again is somebody comes in, they're a really big deal, then they just get sucked down into the muck with everybody else and nobody cares anymore. Or a storyline or an angle, the same thing happens. I was talking to my friend about this, who's a huge AEW fan, and even he was saying it, how like they had something there for a split second with the Bucks and Tony Khan where it felt like the WWE stuff, with Austin McMahon or whatever you want, or where they're trying to take over the company, and Shad Khan came out and it was on ESPN, and it felt like, okay, what are we going to do with this? And the answer was like nothing really, just like nothing. Just the Bucks will just show up, do annoying things and leave and then lose. And I felt like that was the kind of thing where if they had more planning and structure, they would have known where they were going to go with it, and it would have just felt like the beginning of something rather than, oh, we did this really amazing thing. Now what? I don't know. Which is kind of like what it felt like.
And I have some fun memories of that first year too. And to me, it was lightning in a bottle. The first televised show was just, I remember I had my daughter in the room who wasn't really into wrestling, but she could see how excited I was. And I'm like, well, I just never thought I would see something like this. And even some things, just to talk about stuff that I do like, I can't remember what event that was where they had the unsanctioned match with Jon Moxley and Joey Janela. Like, I like stuff like that. I mean, to me, seeing a big name like Jon Moxley and then somebody up and coming like Janela, I mean, I thought that for that first year was just phenomenal for me. And again, I think some of it is that fatigue of knowing too much, hearing too much. The CM Punk thing, in my mind, it really kind of slowed their momentum a little bit. My interest kind of, I was like, I can't believe this is happening, to something that I was like that exciting or that excited and passionate about.
Yeah, I think a couple things. So, and a lot of people, they talk about 2019 when they talk about kind of the glory days of AEW, which I think was their first year. And I don't think they're wrong, but I think that the context of that's important to remember is how bad WWE was, right? So you had that contrast that they were the alternative to a really, this is when you had, God rest his soul, Bray Wyatt as the Fiend, winning matches by drowning people in a lake, and stipulations where you'd win a match by ripping somebody's eyeball out. WWE was at one of its all-time worsts in 2019, 2020, when AEW was coming on. So, I think TNA was that way too, when TNA was kind of hot in the early mid 2000s, was WWE coming off of the Monday Night War and putting WCW out of business, kind of lost their way, and it was presenting an alternative. So I just wonder, like, how much of it is AEW change, how much fans' tastes have changed, how much of it is that WWE has just gotten better. But the one thing that I do think, I mean, if you could point to almost objectively a flaw in the AEW formula, it is that over-reliance on match quality above everything else. And you saw it at Full Gear, where, coming out of it, what was everybody talking about? It was Will Ospreay and Kyle Fletcher, which was a terrific match, no doubt about it. I mean, super, but it just becomes like, so what, and they do that so much. There have been, I saw somebody talk about this, I think it was on Stevie Richards' podcast, and I respect the hell out of Dave Meltzer, but I do think this is where sometimes it's not his fault, but sometimes sort of blindly trying to appease the Dave Meltzers of the world, promoters lose their way. That Bryan Danielson never had a 5-star match before he came to AEW, and since he went to AEW, he's had 8 or something like that. It's just preposterous.
I wish he would just get rid of the star thing. I think it hurts so much more than it helps, because I think he does a lot of great things, and I consider him a national treasure.
I think he's great too, yeah. But
I think
this is on Tony Khan and all the wrestlers who are like,
right?
They perceive that, and I hear Meltzer talking about, like, what's coming up on whatever Collision this week, and they're like, oh, there's a match between Commander and somebody. It's going to be incredible. It's like, and nobody's going to watch it.
Right. Well, it's not even that no one's going to watch. Here's the thing. It's like, it depends on what your goals are. Like, even my wife was telling me this. Because she watches way too much AEW with me, but I think she's right. She said something like, like, if they could be a very successful company if they just aimed lower. Like, that's the thing. Like, you're never gonna be another WWE or WWE alternative doing a product like what they do. You're going to be a really good Ring of Honor. You know what I mean?
But like, the budget is too high. I agree.
Right, right. So like, they're trapped in this corner where if you really want to run a company with that much money and with those stakes and those kind of sponsors where the number expectations are that high, you can't do a show like what they're doing. You just can't, because there's a limit on the amount of people that you can make really care. There are people that you can make really care about those kind of things, but it's just not enough.
We say that, but they're successful, right? I mean, they just got this huge TV deal. So
right, that's a metric of success. Yes.
And it's maybe the biggest. I mean, that's what keeps the lights on, right? I mean,
part of it is TV as a whole is in this weird place right now where you always have to ask yourself, and I'm sure this is what executives are asking themselves. Yes, these numbers are all-time low or whatever, but if we had a Big Bang Theory marathon during this time period of the day, would it draw better? And if the answer is no, then you keep AEW on the air. So that's the thing. It's like, are they still doing better or comparable to everything around them? Then that's a different story. I'm not 100% sure about that, but I mean, TV is just what it is today. The numbers are not. That's why sometimes when people compare from past years, it's so fruitless. It's like a ridiculous, stupid thing to do. Like, Monday Night Raw used to have like 4, 5, 6, 7 million people watching on an average night. Saturday night's main event would have 12 million people watching. You just can't compare with it. It's just a different environment.
It'd be like determining if a movie did well in 2024 by how many people rented out of the red box.
Like, I remember the big thing in '97 when Vince hit the roof and they really started pivoting towards the Attitude Era. It was a story within the company. It was like legendary when they started with the beautiful people and all that. It was when Raw came back with a 1.7 one week, and he went insane, like his head exploded. 1.7. Raw doing a 1.7 is like, yeah, it's a pretty good week. We did pretty good this week.
Yeah, that's like post WrestleMania numbers.
It was it wasn't just low. It was like, what happened? Did half the population just die? Like, what happened?
They were doing sevens at the time. I remember.
Right.
Yeah.
So you just can't. You have to compare to what's happening now, not what.
It's a confusing thing about AEW is that there are all these mixed metrics, and in some way, it's like the arena's empty, but they did a respectable pay-per-view number. They'll do more than 100,000 on pay-per-view, which is a good number. And Warner Brothers Discovery just gave them a boatload of money. So are they actually doing real? I think it is objectively the case that after WCW, they are the second most successful wrestling company in American history, right? I mean,
after WWE and WCW.
Sure. Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, Yeah.
But before we run, Mike, I know you wanted to talk a bit about a story that came out about, and I think it's absolutely newsworthy. Vince McMahon maybe getting back, certainly back in the entertainment business, if not necessarily the wrestling business, and a project that reportedly he's interested in doing, and he had some thoughts on that.
That's what Eric Bischoff says anyway. I think that's the primary source on this, that McMahon's going to launch some kind of new entertainment venture, and one of the first, if not the first thing out of the gate, is going to be his take on the Monday Night Wars, which reminded me of the old Bugs Bunny cartoons where, say, like the plane or whatever he's in keeps going faster and faster and faster until the speedometer reads, "Is this trip really necessary?" I can't. For the first thing, it's difficult for me to fathom why somebody still wants to be out there after having done all of this and where things are right now. Why keep going out there? But then to choose a topic that has been done over and over and over again. Vince McMahon has been able to give his take on things through the WWE media endeavors for decades. So why start with something like that? It just seems like kind of low hanging fruit. Seems almost lazy to me. And to be honest with you, I kind of hope that people don't buy into it. I can't imagine that it's going to be anything great or something that we really haven't seen before, because I can't imagine him wanting to bring up any of his skeletons or any other ones. So I have no concept of not just what this will be, but why it's even on the table.
I wonder what kind of access he would have. I mean, if the idea is some kind of documentary, you would need voices, obviously, besides himself. And I don't know who's talking to Vince McMahon these days, and I was even thinking about that watching Survivor Series, and how clearly they've tried to kind of put him in the past, that they built Survivor Series around War Games, a product that Vince McMahon did not create. It's kind of unthinkable. But I do wonder if he watches from afar and sees them doing so well, and sees them doing things that he would never do. Another thing that, again, really reminded me that this is not the Vince McMahon era anymore was the tiny entrance that they had. Not the big giant splashy drive-in movie screen, but just a door that they come out through so you could sell more tickets, which I think is really, really smart.
What a crazy idea, right?
Yeah. So, but I have wondered in the back, is Vince watching and thinking, I could do this better, So, Brian, any thought on do we see somehow Vince resurface, in the wrestling space?
Well, the thing about this, and I've thought and written a lot about Vince McMahon over the years. I've been around Vince McMahon, and I really do believe that when it comes down to it, like all that he did and everything that he accomplished, his number one mission in all of this was his own kind of gratification and proving who I am and what I can do. That's been the number one goal of all of this. So I don't think This is my speculation that he's the kind of the person who sees how they're doing now and is proud. I think he's the kind of person who sees how they're doing now and just thinks, and is fuming about it and is wishing he was back there again, taking all the credit for it and all the glory, because it's not really about the success of that company. It's about his success. And so, you look at this person, and I've said this on here before, but for crying out loud, you're 80 years old. You're going to be 80. You have 4 grandchildren. Go home. Go. You have more money than God. You can buy and sell the earth 12 times over. Go home. Enjoy your life. Enjoy no offense, not to be morbid, but this is biology. Enjoy the handful of years you have left with your family. Travel the world. Get a hobby. And the fact that he won't do that proves what I said as my first part of what I was saying, that this is just about his constant need to prove himself and take glory and absorb praise, and I'm better than my daddy and all this kind of weirdness. And that's all it will ever be until he's dead.
I agree, and I think the word that serves as an umbrella over that is pathology. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine if I was independently wealthy, saying, "Oh, I can't wait to go back to work." If that happened tomorrow, I don't think I'd be like, "Oh yeah, looking forward."
It's one thing when you say, right, because I think in my mind, like, if I had his money, I'd quit now. Like, you'd never see me again.
Yeah.
And I understand not everybody's like that. And there are people that have this enormous drive to succeed. And it's not just about money, and it's not just about this. I get that. There's different personalities out there. There's a personality and all that. But there's a limit to everything, like to the point where it really, like you said, pathology is the word. You're 80 years old. Like I said, you've done all this. You've made you did it. You did it. There's other things to life. And when you literally seem incapable of comprehending that in any way, his father wasn't like that. There's something wrong, something really, 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 really wrong.
And relaunching your who you are, like, and your empire and everything like that, by revisiting your greatest success, that's a little pathological too.
Well, I think the issue is, I don't know if there's ever a universe that he could have walked away from it willingly, but he walked away from it, or was forced away from it under such bad circumstances, right? That what we're seeing is not just him, the end of his time in wrestling, but really kind of erasing his legacy, both in all the scandal that's attached to it, the Netflix documentary, but maybe more than all those things is the reality that he left WWE, and it's gotten better since he left, and that has got to kill him, right? That like he left it at a low point, and Triple H and Stephanie and Nick Khan, have kind of taken it in a different direction, and it has done better. And that's got to be, I don't know that he ever leaves it at peace, but I think that in particular has really got to affect him, because he doesn't leave with his legacy intact. Sort of day by day with every record that WWE breaks, his legacy and kind of the myth of McMahon is sort of exposed. Like, oh, maybe he wasn't as good as the whole world thought he was. And that's why I could see him being interested in, coming back and retelling the story. And I'll tell you how it really was, and why I really was the mastermind of it all, kind of try to correct his legacy. But it all just reeks of sort of like desperation and sort of pathetic. Yeah. So anyhow, guys, thank you so much. Glad we could get this group together. A lot of fun. Hopefully we will do it again soon. Mike, anything you want to promote before we get out of here?
I'm just happy to be here. I love that people still read print media and appreciate it. So don't just read PWI, buy it and support us.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Brian, always got a lot of irons in the fire. What are we talking about this week?
Oh boy. Well, I mentioned the Meltzer thing last time, but yes, I've got the 150th episode of my podcast, Shut Up and Wrestle, coming up the week before Christmas. So still after this. And my special guest is Dave. We already recorded it, and it was a really great conversation where we didn't dwell on internet toxicity or current wrestling or AEW versus WWE. We talked about nostalgia. We talked about what made us fans and the things we loved about wrestling. And it's a really refreshing conversation that I think people are going to enjoy. And I even got to share with Dave kind of some of my Vince stories that relate to Dave that I never really got a chance to tell him, like about how much space he occupied in Vince's mind on a regular basis, which was fun to be able to talk about. So that's coming out in December. The book is coming along. I'm in the editing stage now. It looks like the changes are going to be really minimal, which is really taking a load off my shoulders. I'm not going to have to go to war with anybody this time around. Maybe they actually trust me more, but it's Irresistible Force, The Life and Times of Gorilla Monsoon, and it's out next year. But for people that want to learn, just check out the podcast because I talk about it every week. And the podcast is Shut Up and Wrestle.
Excellent. Not to launch into a whole other conversation, but I'm reminded when you bring up nostalgia, Saturday night's main event. Are you going?
Well, I'm not sure yet. I'm waiting to hear from a mutual friend of ours as to whether I have passes or not. So once I know whether or not I do, I will know whether or not I'm going. Hopefully I'll be there. It looks like it's going to be a really good show. I am going to the SmackDown the night before, which is on my birthday, my 50th birthday. I'm going to the SmackDown in Hartford. So for sure.
Excellent. What do you think about them relaunching the Saturday Night's Main Event brand?
I think it's awesome. I mean, what's not to love about it? Yeah. I lost my mind. Again, I'm 50 years old, so what do I know? But the joke I always used to make was, imagine if they brought back Obsession by Animotion.
Oh yeah, Animotion.
That would be the greatest thing ever. Like, I really believe that's the greatest opening theme of any wrestling show ever that there's ever been.
I loved it. Yeah,
and they did it. I was like, you did it. You really did it.
I know. But now they've got a new commercial that has that generic Saturday Night's Main Event theme. So yeah, I'm like, I don't know what it's worth, but I'm the same way. It's like, please.
Yeah, right. I'm wondering if they're hedging their bets, because I saw that too, where they were playing like the late 80s version of the one that they did. But yeah, I mean, and they're kicking it off with Cody versus Kevin Owens. So I mean, that's a great way, especially with not having him on Survivor Series. That kind of, I think, kind of makes it feel more special. Like, now we're going to get to see him defend his title. So, we'll see. I mean, I'm joking before, but hopefully I get to go. We'll see. If I don't get to go, I will be very, very fervently watching it on television.
Yeah, I'll be there. I got my tickets on the pre-sale. I hope they really do embrace the nostalgia. I hope we have red, white, and blue ring ropes. There's talk of Jimmy Hart's going to be there.
Jesse
Ventura. Hopefully, maybe on commentary. Bring out Bob Orton, who headlined. There's not that many of these guys left. From that era. The one bring out Hogan. The ones who are around. I hope they find a place for them. That'd be really cool.
It would be, yes.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thank you so much for doing it. We will be back soon.
Thanks.